Welcome to Innovation Nashville. This week our guest is Steve Keller from IV Music. Steve and his team are doing some really interesting things at the intersection of music production, branding, and the advertising space. So join us as we learn from Steve how IV Music is innovating entertainment this week on Innovation Nashville. With us today we have Steve Keller from IV Music.
Hello.
In Nashville, Tennessee. Steve, give us a little backstory on you. What's your story and kind of how'd you get to Nashville?
I'll try and give you the quick version.
Yeah, give me the.
I grew up in West Virginia.
Yep.
Never thought about doing anything with music, as a vocation. But ever since I was a kid, I took piano lessons. I wanted to be the next Beethoven, except I wanted to be able to hear. And then picked up a guitar and wrote songs, but mainly as a dating tool in high school. But when it came time to go to college, I was looking at other things, and so I went to school and majored in psychology. Okay. Graduated with my degree in psychology and was sitting out for a year working and planning on going to get a master's and then a PhD. And I was playing in some coffee houses and singing, and the bug just kind of took hold. And I went to one of my psychology professors and said, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Yeah. And he said, take a year off, see what happens. You can always go to grad school. Yeah. So I don't have my master's or my PhD. I ended up going kind of the independent artist route and realized that Nashville would be a much better place for me to grow. Yeah. And moved to town in '86 and was trying to figure out where I fit into the grand scheme of things here, being a little bit more of a pop urban guy. And I started working with a buddy of mine named Scott Rouse, and we had this idea about doing
inimitable Scott Rouse,
about doing some dance remixes of some country songs, and so it was kind of through that I ended up getting an invitation from Curb Records to do a remix of a single for a new artist that they had, and the single was Indian Outlaw, and the new artist was Tim McGraw. Okay. And
so that early '90s.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was really what kind of turned the corner for me. From there, I had an opportunity to look at a lot of master tapes, work with all the major labels in town. But I knew that was a trend. That at some point, because the country music industry never really understood the remixes, right. When budgets started to get tightened, that was going to go away. And so I ended up kind of looking a couple years ahead and met with a fellow named Chris Parker, who had a company at the time called Whistlers, and started doing some music for commercials, right. Composing, working with Chris on that, and had a really great run with Chris and that company, and then left in probably around 2003. And started a management company. Mm-hmm. And it was my attempt to kind of break out of just the music scene here in town. So it was a brand management company. A couple of the brands were artists, but we also worked with corporate entities and then did a lot of freelance work, writing copy and coming up with strategies for advertising agencies, design houses. Yeah. And then in a very odd twist of fate, ended up going back and buying the company from Chris, where I used to work, in 2005, and that was IV. Mm-hmm. And that brings me from 2005 to here. Right. So I stepped into the role of the owner of IV, and at that point in time, talk about disruption, things were really starting to change with technology and the industry, and it's had a very interesting impact on how I've had to approach business from then until now. So that's my history in a nutshell.
Let's. I want to go to the disruption question in a bit, but talk a little bit about kind of the structure of IV. How's that set up, and kind of the model, the customers.
When we first started, we were operating kind of under the traditional music house model, which was typically agencies would call, they would need music for a commercial, and we'd have an assignment, we'd execute something, and that would be that.
Right.
But
the traditional jingle.
Exactly. But again, looking forward, and more specifically looking at our location in Nashville, I felt like if we stayed on that path, there was no sustainability or survival.
Right. A lot of jingle companies didn't make the transition.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that I looked at was repositioning us as not just a music house, but a company that dealt strategically with audio as a whole, whether that is voiceovers or sound design. And it was right around that time that you started hearing more about audio branding as more of a buzzword.
Right.
And so what we've done is we've shifted our model to a point now where it's built around 3 tracks, if you will. One's strategy, the other's execution, and then the third is measurement. Okay. But the execution phase, which is what most people are familiar with, still happens fairly similarly to what would happen in a traditional audio post or music house. Our model is built around having a core team of composers. They don't work in rooms here. They're guys that work on albums, and their dream really isn't to sit around doing work for commercials. It's to just create music.
Sure.
So we usually have projects coming in. We'll work with this core team of producers. Then we'll bring in musicians as we need them. And it gives us a lot of flexibility. It enables me to have a small core of staff who are concentrated and committed to the vision of the community as a whole. But then it allows us to kind of be continually updating our talent pool, finding new people, not just working with people in Nashville, but all across the country and the world. But I make it a real point that if there's a composer that we're working with on a regular basis, it doesn't matter where they are, I go and meet with them. Because community is a really important part of what we do. I like to say that IV is a reflection of the Nashville brand, which for me has nothing to do with music. It has everything to do with collaboration. Okay. The thing that's really unique to me about Nashville is it's a very collaborative town. Right. Even those of us who engage in competition, we get together, we network, we talk about what's happening, we trade stories. Yeah. We try to find ways to help and to work together. And I think that the new competition is actually collaboration these days. So what we've tried to do when we sell IV as a company is actually selling Nashville as a community. That's part of what makes us so unique, is this collaborative element that's here, not just in the music community, but in the tech community that's really growing, in the business community, the ways that we can all work together and bring interesting facets to the business. So our model is built around that community.
That's interesting you said, because for Innovation Nashville, that's kind of part of our DNA. Is like everybody's siloed out into their own pockets, whether they're coders or entrepreneurs or music people. So part of what we love to do is that kind of drove the conversation in organizing Innovation Nashville. Is like, look, let's create an event where people can come together once a month, cross-pollinate, build relationships, community, and just have smart conversations about people who are doing interesting stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's part of our
and there's all kinds of interesting things happening in
yeah.
Nashville, and that's it's unfortunate, but the Nashville brand has been so kind of framed around country music.
Right.
And you know, they're trying to change that, and with the Mayor's Commission and some other things. But you know,
what are your thoughts on the mayor's?
Oh, you want me to get political? Personally,
Mayor's music panel.
Yeah, I feel like the new music panel is. First of all, I have to applaud the mayor for trying to put something together to address the issues. As with any of these things, when you're dealing with volunteers and time commitments, it's hard to pull things together, to have that, to be really innovative. And you know, you used the word earlier, disruptive, which I think is really important. I think it's difficult for Nashville to transform itself. I think it's necessary and important, and I'm excited because I think we have an opportunity to really make Music City the focal point. But I think there's a window, and as technology is continuing to advance, if we don't get ahead of the curve here, some other place is going to do it.
I totally agree.
So that's more of my problem with the council, is that you know it's moving very slowly.
Right.
Because there are political elements, you have to think about you know, where the money's coming from that does drive things. You're dealing with old models that are hard to change, and new models that are screaming to get a voice. And I'm a brand guy, so I'm really sensitive to branding and have specific ideas about how you would go about trying to shape a brand. And that's where I think things have kind of been bogged down, that I have yet to see a real kind of unified concept around how do we reframe this brand, and then how do we engage consumers, how do we align it with all the other values of Music City. I mean, all the basic things that you do in a branding strategy, that's not there. And it's frustrating, you know, as a business owner. But again, I think the best that I can do is try to do my own advocacy for Nashville, and that's what I really want to do with our company, is not simply do good work for our clients, but I want to find ways to collaborate and work with people here in Nashville in a way that is going to help reframe the brand.
So you're talking about Nashville early model, previous model, and now the forward-looking model.
Right.
How do you, I mean, you were part of the 90s Garth era.
Sure.
You understand that model of, hey, we got to sell records and have hit singles.
Yeah.
What's changed? What have you seen? And I know that's a big question, but what's changed, and how do you see around corners for your company?
Well, you know, obviously I always have to start with a caveat if it's just my opinion.
Sure.
But, you know, the real thing that I think changed was that there was a shift in who controlled access. At the end of the day, when it comes down to it, that was the real problem, you know, and not
control.
Yeah, not illegal downloading, not piracy.
No.
You know, I think that was symptomatic, and you know, I'm not going to say that it didn't have an economic impact, but ultimately the technology simply opened the floodgates to where the label no longer had control over distribution. And radio wasn't the only place where someone was going to hear about new music.
As far as breaking a new artist.
Yes, exactly. So I think you've got that aspect, and then I think there's been something else that's been happening that you don't hear a lot about, and that's the commoditization of music.
Okay.
That as music becomes, quote unquote, easier to produce, you know, the tools are much easier to get a hold of. A lot of people can be creative.
Everybody has Pro Tools.
Yeah, exactly.
So
and you can argue all day, you know, in terms of artistic quality, you know, has it helped or hurt? But from a financial perspective, from economics, what it's done is you have more access to more music than ever before. And as a result, it's just driven down the value monetarily of music. So you see us approaching a point where the music potentially is worth $0.
The idea of music going free.
Yes. Yeah.
Pinky is
right.
Talk about that again.
Yeah. I think that the exciting part of that challenge is that it's forced us to have to think about other ways to actually fund the creative process. I don't think people are going to stop being creative.
Yeah.
I think the question is from a business standpoint, how are we going to make this work?
Right.
And I think you see more and more do-it-yourself musicians. I mean, this is the value of the access, the doors, being blown off, is that now, you can have direct access with a fan in a way you never could before. You can have a fan participate in the funding of an album, in the content of the album, in the creation, in a way that was never possible.
Yeah.
And I think as a result, you see budgets shrink from here to here. But you also, end up with artists that begin to think, you know what? Maybe $50,000, maybe $70,000, maybe $100,000 a year is actually a great income. If I can, make something that, in terms of sustainability, allows me to live and do my art. I know a lot of acts who, had big record deals that weren't even bringing that home at the end of the day with the recoupables. So, the challenge is, when you have an industry that the model is built so much around the value of the music.
Right.
When that value dwindles, then it's like, okay, that industry has to shift into something else, because the product that they're producing is no longer going to be the gas that drives the engine.
Yeah. Well, in talking about the shift, I mean, obviously records aren't selling. Radio singles are decreasing year over year. So performance royalties are leveled off a good bit. What are you seeing in the advertising vertical?
Well,
is where's that going, and how
there's a couple of things that I'm seeing, in terms of, from my angle. Obviously, this affects my business model too, because traditionally, a music house, the product that it generated was a piece of music, and it had a particular value attached to it.
Coke is it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, now there's more accessibility than ever to artists, to music libraries, to music everywhere. So, a music house that's attempting to sell, build its revenue around this product, it's becoming harder and harder. Unless you're one of the larger, more established companies where you're already on that speed dial, and you're going to get that call. So, it's caused us to kind of shift our model and begin looking at what do we monetize apart from the music that makes things valuable. But addressing your question specifically about artists and licensing, I think advertising right now is one of the places where acts can continue to make a decent amount of money. I've certainly seen the budgets shrink there, and I've certainly seen advertisers being very interested in working with independent bands, because those licenses are a fraction of what the licenses are for some of those bigger, more established acts. And now brands are actually building themselves around being tastemakers and introducing people to new acts. And it's definitely changed from the days when most acts would say, well, working with an advertiser is selling out.
Right.
Whereas now brands are actually positioning themselves to be the new A&R, the new labels. I mean, if you look at what Coke is doing right now, what they did with Maroon 5, and another band, I think it's One Night Stand, where they actually work with these bands, they involve fans, They integrate their audio logo, which is da 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 da, which is their 5 golden tones that they call them, into the compositions.
Interesting.
They did that with Kanan, who did the theme for the World Cup, and he had those tones in there, and Coke didn't even make a big deal about it. It was later on that people started to notice, wait a second, that's the Coke. Oh, what? Yeah, they had a deal. They had worked out a deal beforehand, and so there's this ability now where acts can actually generate some revenue by looking for these kinds of licenses. It gives them access to fans. The brands love being able to network that way. So there's more possibilities to make revenue that way than for most acts getting a record deal right now.
That's great. So what would you say is one of the most common misconceptions about what you guys do?
I think the most, for what we do now from an audio branding standpoint, I think the most common misperception is we're the guys that you call at the end of the process, and usually the phone call will go something like this. I'll get the call, the creative director will be on the other end, and he'll say, Steve, we just finished this big shoot, we're $100,000 over budget.
Out of money.
We're out of money. We've been editing the video to I Can't Get No Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones. Client loves it. He's in love with it because he's just seen it so many times, but there's no way we can afford that because we're already over budget. So we need to know how close can you get to that without ripping it off, and can you do it for a couple of grand, and can we get it in 24 hours? So what we're attempting to do is change that conversation from being at the end of the process to the beginning.
Okay.
So we've been targeting Europe for a number of reasons. One, I was finding that New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, for better or for worse, they always thought of Nashville, no matter what I played for them, as country. Mm-hmm. So it was, hey, we'll give you a call if we need a banjo.
Okay.
And I felt that the talent pool here was absolutely amazing, whether anybody got it or not. And I didn't want to be in New York or Los Angeles or Chicago because I felt like I couldn't do for my clients there what I can do for them here. So we made a conscious decision to actually go to the European market first and put a lot more of our emphasis there. And we found that it's really connected. I've opened an office there with Uli Rees, my partner there in Europe. It's a totally separate legal entity. It's IV2, but that allows us to kind of work within the European structure. And we've positioned the company there as being a strategic partner. And so what's happened is we've started to get involved in ad agencies on the pitch level.
Okay.
Early, when they're going after new business. And we're right now 2 for 2. Last year we helped an agency called Schultz and Friends, who was going after Opel, which is a huge GM division there. Yeah. McCann Erickson had been the ad agency that had the client. It went into review. We developed an audio branding component of the pitch, and Schultz won. Then we were asked by another agency, Kolareba, to work with them on Otto, which is another huge kind of direct mail client there, catalog-based business that's now getting more into the digital world and internet world. And we helped them, and they won the pitch. Great. And now what's happened as a result of that is we're starting to get calls to where we're having to say to an agency, if you had only been 5 minutes earlier, I'm sorry, but we've already been asked. We're actually helping your competition.
Right.
But what that's allowed us to do is actually work with agencies on strategy. And for me, that's where I think our future is thinking about audio strategically. And part of that is this measurement component. So there's a whole research side of this. been talking with Charles Spence, who's the head of the Cross-Modal Research Lab at Oxford University. He's the guy that works testing the sounds and smells, and he to give you an example of what Charles was involved in. Axe deodorant came to him, and he worked with them in his lab, and they brought test subjects in. They would sit them in a booth with headphones, microphone, give them a spray can, say, spray this can, and then we want you to rate it, the sound of the spray with some adjectives. And then, they get another can, do another spray. Well, what the test subjects didn't realize was that the spray was actually not being mic'd at all. What they were hearing through the headphones was the sound of spray that was being attenuated certain frequencies.
Okay.
So, as a result of the testing, they found what seemed to be the most powerful, sexiest, most manly spray for these test subjects.
Interesting.
And if you go
all notched at different frequencies.
Exactly. Okay. So if you go to the supermarket or the convenience store and you look for Axe deodorant, the spray can, you'll see this can that's topped with a black plastic top.
Yeah.
I think you have to kind of twist it and pull it down. It appears to be like a protective top. Mm-hmm. It's actually been engineered to baffle and focus the sound in such a way that it gets the sound of that spray as close to the frequency as possible.
Interesting.
So that it highlights this, and that's audio branding. So there's a whole science research component. We're working with a Microsoft engineer from Atlanta right now on how to align verbal, visual, and audio data so that we can eventually get to a point where if a client says, can you make that more orange, we actually can say, yes, we can, and here's how we would do it from the research.
Interesting. So what kind of collaboration? You've got Germany?
Yes.
Office in Germany and Nashville?
Nashville.
Totally separate creative community?
Actually, all the creative is done from Nashville.
Okay.
That's part of the whole thing that sells it. Uli, my partner, is in Frankfurt, where our office is, and I'm there usually 4 or 5 times a year, where we'll just take a road trip and I'll visit the clients and take the meetings, and we'll do the consulting that we need to. So we're beginning to collaborate more there with brain power.
Okay.
There's some things on the testing front that we're wanting to get into, where we're going to have to find some partners who can help us test how some of the things that we're doing in terms of audio is affecting consumer emotions and consumer behavior for the branding. So we're definitely forming some partnerships there. And in the spirit of Nashville and collaboration, we're meeting a lot of musicians, we're talking to other music companies, because the reality is as we move closer to being able to monetize the strategy component, there may be times where we're not even wanting to execute. Where we may say, here's the strategy, I tell you what, the execution is going to be better served if we go Atlanta over here or go there. But when we're doing execution, that's all being done out of Nashville. Occasionally we'll have a composer that may be from New York or LA that's not part of the Nashville stable, but we work so much as teams that guys know that I don't let composers mix their own stuff. We always bring in independent engineers. Again, that's part of our philosophy, bringing kind of this interesting community of folks together. And so composers have to be able to check their ego at the door and know that once they deliver files...
How do you do that?
Well, it's just it's a conversation. It's a conversation. And again, it's the other thing that I love about Nashville is that I don't really have those issues. Everybody gets it because they're used to collaborating that way. So we may start with a team of 5 or 6 composers who are competing against each other for a job. But then when the job's awarded, a client may come back with changes. And sometimes that happens so fast that the last thing I can do is go back to the composer and say, I need you to change this and this and this. Sometimes we'll make adaptations in Singer or in tracks or do edits, and the composer may hear the finished product later on. Sometimes I have to put 2 composers together because a client may like this, and it's better served now, bringing a couple of teams together. But it's really all about the team and how to work most efficiently for the client. And I think monetarily that works out the best too, because as budgets get cut, as there's more and more projects that are done on the basis of buyouts or some things that just get licensed, my attempt is to do a great job, but have everybody only spend the amount of time that they really need to.
Sure.
So that they can get on with doing the other things that they want to. Yeah, and IV, I want it to be a place that feeds other people's dreams.
Yeah.
My goal has always been for this place to contribute to the community that way. And that's the cycle of value. I'm not there yet, but at some point, what I hope is that if I can monetize the strategy and the research part even more, then less of the burden is for funding things is on the execution phase. Mm-hmm. And at which point, it's a lot easier for me to then begin saying, use the studio, generate a project. Here you go. Here's a project we just finished. Here's the bulk of the share of the revenue that's coming from that. Mm-hmm. Take that and do something else with it. Building something where it's so community based that people are coming in, talent's changing, it's giving back to the community, but it's not the execution that's funding it. It's these other things on the outside.
Steve, what are your thoughts on the music library model of retitling and derivative copyright, kind of cloning of copyrights?
The whole copyright thing, it's another ball of wax, and I probably will step into it a little bit. I think we have to face the fact that at some point the copyright laws are going to have to shift. They're going to have to change. I think part of how we have attempted to hang on to some of those rights, at least where they have currently been, or doing things like attempting to charge a company like Pandora an exorbitant amount of money on the license side that almost puts them out of business, mm-hmm. is not forward thinking or sustainable. So I understand these companies that they're retitling things. To me,
and just so people understand what we're talking about, here's a copyright. Mm-hmm. Band X created this amazing copyright, and said music library will create a clone copyright, and sign the clone.
Right.
So it's kind of a Blade Runner.
It's an attempt. It's an attempt to get around exclusivity.
Okay.
So you don't run into this issue if if you come to me with your tracks and I say, John, I would love to represent your tracks to some advertisers. I want exclusivity. Don't give these to anybody else, and let me get them out there. Well,
you represent the catalog.
Exactly. Well, what's happened is, obviously, as you can imagine, as this whole idea of access has the playing field is leveled. Well, people have access to advertisers. An advertiser can call a band directly if they hear tracks. There's all kinds of companies that are springing up more and more that are representing licenses. So it gets harder and harder to force that exclusivity issue. So to get around that, these companies are saying, look, it's non-exclusive, but what we want to do is we want to retitle it. So that way, if we place it, it's going under our title, and we're taking whatever percentage of the revenue you're getting your percentage of the revenue that way. But it just gets harder and harder to kind of manage that. And the companies, obviously, that want exclusivity, they want to fight against that, because the minute a company does that kind of titling, you can't really get exclusivity.
Right.
So their business model begins to break down.
Yeah.
I think library companies do a great service. They do a really, they're doing great music. I think the problem with libraries are they've part of what has added to this commoditization of music, because now it gets cheaper and cheaper to have music.
Devaluing.
Yeah, and if you really don't care from a strategic standpoint how well that music might fit a visual, which you should, because what the research shows is a congruent piece of audio with a visual will increase the impact of the underlying message on a commercial basis by 1,107%. If that audio is non-congruent, if it doesn't fit, it actually will decrease the impact by 86%.
So if it feels like it came out of a...
If it feels like it's
music
something that's just
library,
slapped on there, if it...
You're doing damage to your...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but, I think you're going to see more and more things happen, like what just happened with Warner and Randy's company, 615 Music, where they bought the music library. I mean, let's face it, the publishers are in the same boat because of access that the labels are. And they're not able to generate the revenue they can, so they're actually beginning to go into the space where the labels were. And the more opportunity they have to own masters, or to have an opportunity where maybe through a library they've been connected to a brand source, so they can take an act that they've signed and maybe take that master, license that master beyond the library. It's all about trying to play in that space.
Right.
So, the retitling thing, I understand. I don't know that I would say it's a great thing for acts, but...
Here's where it's going to bite them. As watermarking and digital fingerprinting are integrated more into the process,
Right.
a clone, you're going to have two songs being shown as the same fingerprint. So
Right.
is that the original or is that the replicant
Right.
copyright?
Well,
So
and that's where I think it's going to be interesting to see. Right now, part of the problem has always been, from the commercial side, you're not generating that many royalties. If you are, you're having to do the work of submitting the paperwork, because no matter how well ASCAP, BMI, or CSEC tells you that they're monitoring these things, it's just really difficult. Then you combine that with the whole weighted aspect. At ASCAP, a Rolling Stones song in a 30-second spot is going to make a whole lot more money than a piece of music I write, even if it were for the same spot, played the exact same places, the exact same time.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other aspect too, where the watermarking, I think, could hurt, because then it looks like it's all these smaller copyrights instead of one big copyright that's kind of building weight itself.
Interesting. That's great. So, Steve, to the kid coming out of MTSU or Belmont or even Full Sail, what do you tell that kid that's graduating?
It's like
who's kind of following in a similar path?
Man, I feel for these universities and these companies that have kind of built these business models around, get a degree and then go get your job. I mean, you and I know that it's never really been that way, but now more so than ever, there aren't those typical jobs, and so usually when I'm speaking,
so the job at the record label isn't there anymore,
or even the publishing company, or
Yeah.
the business has shifted so much. So usually when I'm speaking to colleges or mentoring, or people are asking me my advice, I'm usually telling them to think more as an entrepreneur. If they're thinking about this vocationally, and I think this is part of a very old debate that is, was kind of born when we attempted to kind of have music and commercialism kind of coexist, and so how are you going to pay your bills? How are you going to have a vocation? And I think you need more than ever to realize that you're a businessman or a businesswoman. I think in the past it was easy to think that the labels were going to be that, or the publisher was going to be that. But now the people who are going to rule the roost to me are the people who come out and say, I'm the business person. How am I going to make this work? How am I going to be innovative? How am I going to engage my fans and my consumers? The good news is there are ways to do that now that were never possible,
Sure,
you know,
sure.
even 5 years ago. And so, you know, I think at some point these businesses that are in the role of training are going to need to revamp their model. I mean, I think leadership music, for instance, needs to look at their categories and look at the way that the business is morphing and changing, because the traditional model, you know, it's still taking on water, but it's still floating.
Mm-hmm.
But more and more the winners are going to be, I think, these entrepreneurs. So, you know, I tell them, you know, you need to be doing the exact same things that I'm doing, which is, you know, you get up early, you spend a couple of hours on the web, looking at the trends, following the rabbit holes, trying to see what the dots are so that you can step back and learn how to connect them. You're doing the hard work of building a fan base, finding a way to connect with them. You're attempting to be creative, to find those things that set you apart from everyone else. But
All within an entrepreneurial
yes,
heading.
yeah.
So
Again,
everybody graduating out of Belmont this year, out of the music business program, is an entrepreneur.
yes,
Whether they know
in
it or
in
not.
my opinion, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of more interesting places that you can go to engage what was typically the music business in the past. I mean, the digital sector, for one. I think advertising, I think more and more, you know, you're seeing, particularly the larger agencies, they have music supervisors on staff now.
Sure.
You know, the major ad agencies are doing as much, if not more, A&R than labels were in the past. So I think that that's a place that, you know, people don't typically look at. Management is another area that I think will continue to grow and be necessary, you know, to be a business manager. But I think it's just, you have to think outside of the box, and you have to be prepared for the fact that this is not a, you know, you've got your degree and now you're going to go interview at a company. That world is really, really different. And I
Yes.
think even doing internships now, they should be seeing a difference there, and probably looking for some not traditional places of doing an internship.
Yeah.
You know, don't go to a label. Look for a digital startup somewhere. Do
Yeah.
do an internship that's totally outside
Okay.
the realm of
So,
what you
so
would think.
talking about startups in and around Nashville and
Mhm.
technology, what are you seeing that's interesting? Do you keep an ear to the ground?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do. I don't have as much time as I would like to be as involved in all the different
Sure.
podcasts and bar camps and Digital Nashville and the Entrepreneur Center and
Yeah.
you know, all those things that are going on that are great. But that's the value of social media, is I can kind of keep up a little bit with Twitter and Facebook and all the feeds.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the thing that's really encouraging to me is that I notice more and more from a national perspective that there's more attention on Nashville as, you know, the Silicon Valley of the South, if you will,
Yeah.
and that we're attracting a lot of talent here. And I hope that Metro will realize that and begin to do some things to really engage that talent.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I think that there's some amazing web developers, some great coders. You know, I've seen companies do some really great things with apps. There's some upstart agencies, you know, that are doing some things that are outside of the box. And I think that's what Nashville needs, is for more of us to be telling our stories and collaborating, and at the same time, and this is me thinking from a brand and marketing perspective again,
Yeah.
at the same time, trying to focus on how do we build those stories that are going to get the biggest bang for the buck.
Right.
You know, that the big news feeds are going to pick up on, that are going to continue to help our star shine, and for people to say, "Wow, that's Nashville,
Yeah.
huh? Maybe I need to check that out."
That's great. So, one last question. But 2 questions. Do you have a favorite Nashville story that is particularly funny?
I don't know. Do we need to close the door because of the
I like the soundtrack
music
going on.
coming in from the other,
It's angelic.
from the other room? Yeah, I'm not sure what Dan's working on in there, but a favorite Nashville story. Just a personal story.
Yeah.
Well, I could tell you about the time I was waiting tables and met Tanya Tucker and all the things she said to me, but you'd probably have to edit all that
Yeah,
out.
we want to keep the PG iTunes rating.
Yeah. No, I think one of my favorite moments was being at an event after some things really started to hit with the remixes, and
Yeah.
I was working more and more in town and in the industry, and I would inevitably get, people looking at me and they'd say, "Don't I know you from somewhere?" And I'd always talk about the projects that we had worked on. But the reality is that they recognized me because for years I waited tables.
Really?
And I waited on all of these people, and I actually remember how all of them tip. So
that's good.
I filed that away.
That's great. All right, last question.
Yeah.
Favorite Van Halen song ever?
Man, it's funny because I just read the I think it was a Rolling Stones interview with Sammy Hagar.
Sammy Hagar thing?
Talking about all the stuff with Eddie that was going on. Oh,
You have to pick one.
I mean, I'd still have to say Jump. I mean, just when that whole synth line that starts, it's become so iconic.
Yeah.
It's one of those, can you name that song in, one note? And all you have to do is hear that first synth chord, and it
So for the record, Steve Keller, favorite Van Halen song, Jump.
Jump.
And on that note, we can end it.